So I want to welcome everybody back to what we are calling our third season of Beyond Innovation.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a little while since we've recorded any seasons, and I'm really excited to be back. And I want to introduce Lynn Rakowsky, who has been a part of this podcast actually since the very beginning, since the very first episode. You were sort of living in the shadows, helping to do most of the production work, and now have come out of the shadows into the seat, which is very strange to say.
It's so dramatic.
Okay. But your role here is right in the middle of all of this, and I'm looking forward to the shift where I'm not sitting here by myself. We're in this great new room that we built.
It's fantastic.
Just for this podcast, which is excellent. And we're going to kind of go back to the beginning as we reset here. And we're going to talk about what innovation is and means and how people can action ideas within this space, which is an area that we spend 95% of our time in within our practice. And I think we have a pretty interesting set of ideas to go through, and I'm looking forward to it.
It's great to be here, and I'm really excited about the new format that we're taking on, not because I'm going to be in front, but also because we're going to be bringing other people from within our practice to bring their expertise to the table, which I think is super valuable. But the first thing that we should do here today is to help define what is innovation.
Agreed.
Right? It's used a lot of different ways, but Webster's, which is a tried and true source for all of us, defines it as a new idea, method, or device, some sort of novelty, or the introduction of something new.
Interesting.
Which says it's something new. Okay.
Very simple, says a lot, and nothing at the same time. So I'm going to bring my own little dictionary. I'm prepared to.
Oh, I like that.
That says Fast Company's definition, as evidenced by their top 10 that they announced for 2020. I believe this is the 2024 list.
It is 2024.
Goes like this. Number 1, what you'd expect, NVIDIA. Number 2, Novo Nordisk, Microsoft. Okay, that's number 3. Number 4, UAW. So that's the United Auto Workers.
Mm-hmm. Feels like a surprise.
Interesting choice. Number 5, NWSL, so the Women's Soccer League. Another interesting choice. Okay, Gensler. YouTube, what you'd expect. Number 8, Taco Bell. I think all this says is the idea of what is new is where the variables lie. So if you read further, why did the UAW get called out? For electrifying the labor movement. Not electrifying the vehicles, not some process innovation, but for the way that they managed their labor movement through a really complicated time where they were striking, etc. Mm-hmm. NWSL for resetting the value of women's sports. Women's sports has seen a huge bloom. Women's sports has been under this massive growth in popularity over the course of the last really decade, but over the last 5 years, it's just hit this tipping point where it's really accelerated. I know for one, I have mentioned this to you before. We both have daughters. We both watched a lot of women's soccer. I really enjoy watching professional women's soccer. I played soccer my whole life, and I find the women's game to be really engaging as a sport. And NWSL has done an excellent job of sort of bringing that to the masses.
I have to make one comment on this.
Yeah.
Because it's beyond just elevating visibility to women's sports. It's reestablishing the value
100%.
Of women's sports.
Yeah.
Long drawn out battle to ensure equity in pay and experience and whatnot. And that alone is what is elevating.
And it started in tennis 50 years ago.
Yep.
And it's just inched its way through a bunch of different sports. So super interesting that Fast Company has blurred these lines in a way that I think is really impactful for the way that we look at our business. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's lots to be learned. This list goes on. You can find it. You can find it online.
One of the things that this list says to me when I'm looking at this really wide, disparate group of things that are innovative, right, is the commonality that all of these organizations has is that they've worked very hard to create a culture of innovation. 100%. And that is why they are able to succeed in their missions, right? So we've spent a lot of time and we work with a lot of companies. We've seen good cultures and challenging cultures and burgeoning cultures. And we've come to 4 key points that help create a very solid culture of innovation. And I'm going to name the 4.
Hit it.
And then we're going to talk about them.
Love it.
Okay. Having a sandbox, be willing to invest dollars in it, have a flexibility in your process, and make sure that you're hiring the right talent. Table stakes, nothing new and innovative, but let's dig into each of these. So sure. Let's start with sandbox.
So I think the sandbox piece of this puzzle is the foundation for all of the other components. If you don't have a sandbox, the rest of the processes that you put in place will by default start from a different point in the ideation space that make it much harder to step outside of your core business, make it much harder to step outside of your sort of standard operating model because you lack the experimentation space. So we've had this conversation with lots of clients over the years about what a sandbox means and what it doesn't mean. And I'm going to start with what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean an unmonitored, unmanaged budget. I think that's where most managers come in and say, I'm not just going to throw money into a pot and see what happens. A sandbox has to be done under strategic guidance of an organization with visibility toward where the company is going today and where the adjacencies might exist that it wants to explore. Where we've seen this implemented really successfully is when you have a group who is extremely knowledgeable about the core business, who is empowered to take chances at looking at ways to either find adjacencies or expand unexpectedly within an organization's verticals, revenue streams, whatever they may be. And those sandbox teams almost always include people from across different components of the organization that allow you to really vet ideas quickly and kill them almost as quickly as you start them. You're just throwing them out because they quickly prove themselves to not be valuable. So in large organizations, sandboxes are, I'm going to say, a requirement to find, I am going to air quotes, innovation inside of a well-established business.
Yeah, because I think it's super critical to ensure that the core business remains sort of untouched while you're figuring this out, right? So you're not distracting folks from the core business that needs to continue and take that forward. So, okay, so the next one is willingness to invest.
Okay, so culturally speaking, if you ask 10 CEOs of, mid to large size businesses if they're willing to invest in new ideas, 10 of them are going to say yes. They're all going to say yes. Yeah, of course. If it's a good idea, I'll put money behind it. The problem is you don't know that it's a good idea when the time is needed for you to put money behind it. And so therefore, the culture is what drives good investment decisions because you've built. So if we think about this as a stack, the sandbox is the core, and you've loaded that sandbox with talented people who you trust. Then when something starts to show merit that comes out of that sandbox, leadership then has to have the ability to trust that group of people knows the direction that the business wants to go, knows the direction that the market is probably going, and you are willing to then have investable funds to start to test those ideas I'll use the word rationally. So you're building out proofs of concept that then allow you to determine, are we headed in the right direction, yes or no, with always the option to change direction, stop a project, and you can really get some traction through proofs of concept. I'm going to use an example from our past. So we used to work with a guy who is now retired, a multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporation. And his extraordinary strength was finding little bits of money. And I mean like 50 grand here, 100 grand there, where he could quietly try a couple of things. And our job was to try them efficiently. Once we created enough momentum behind them, then his job was to sell them upstairs to management. And when we did our job right, his job was easy. And his executive management trusted that he knew where the market was going because he had a very, very long track record of this. And they were then willing to say, okay, I'm going to open up a medium budget, a couple $100,000. And then I'm going to open up a bigger budget. And by the time we were done, the budgets that we would extract to get these things actually executed ended up in the millions of dollars. But we didn't try to do all that all at once. We just said sandbox dollars, then build proof of concept dollars that get proof points from the marketplace that you're going in the right direction. Then that builds R&D dollars that then build product rollout, actual product budgets. And his ability to make that happen was very measured. But that trust is what allowed him to do that job. And he, by default, trusted us. And we were able to then test a lot of ideas really quickly. And I mean, I think over the course that I'm going to make this number up, but over the course of the time that we worked together, we probably generated $100 million in revenue for the organization, starting with 50 to 100 grand at a time. And we just did it in this very methodical way. It's not the wild, wild west. It's very process driven.
Yeah. Speaking of process.
Good segue.
Nice segue.
Unintentional.
So that's like the process of releasing of funds and budgets associated with it.
Right.
So tied to investing. But process itself is really important in driving innovation.
True point.
And we are expressing that you need to have flexibility in process, because process sometimes sounds rigid, but that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah. And I think a lot of organizations look at their quote unquote innovation process, which many big companies have, and they try to drive all of the potential options through what effectively is the same process funnel. And what ends up happening is that process funnel by default gets built around the core business. It should get built around the core business, because if the core business is to succeed, you need to have very good processes in place so that you can grow and expand that core business. But if you try to drive something that goes to an adjacency through the same pipe that's built for core business operations and sales, one of two things is going to happen. It's either going to run into roadblocks because the process is built to block those types of ideas. That's kind of its job. Or you will miss really critical opportunities because the doors don't open to the left and to the right. They only open moving forward. So an example that we were just on a call with a client of ours a week ago, where they have a very, I'll call it rigid core business. It's not regulated, but it's very rigid and it's very finite. And the project that they have hired us for is, how do we take where we are and get one step outside of it in either direction so that we can start to see some tangential growth without changing the product. That is all about resetting that process, because that process is there to take the core product and drive it down a very specific path. Yep. So the project that we've been brought in to do is to say, okay, and to their credit, their CEO is in our brainstorms, in our meetings, pushing his team to say, we need to think about this differently, because if we keep the same process, we will end up in the same place. Yep. And he knows we need to end up in a different place. So that process step of thinking about this differently has a couple of different, I'll call it traps. Trap number one is if you bring the same group of people with the same ideas, with the same goals, and you try to put them in a new process, you will almost always fail. If you inverse that and you bring new people into the same process, trying to put new ideas, you will also almost always fail. And so there's this very thin balancing act between those two, where the type of people combined with the shift in process is what allows companies to steer things. You're not trying to turn the company like 180 degrees. Yep. You're just trying to steer it a little bit over to the left or a little bit over to the right from where the trajectory that it was otherwise on, so that you can find advancements. And it's a very careful balance. We get brought into clients from time to time where us walking in the door, the executive team will think, I'm going to bring this creative group in who's got experience doing innovation, and they're going to sort us out. And it's a really difficult challenge for us, because we're walking into a spot where the process is built for a very particular result. When you bring a group like us in who has had the experience that we've had into a process that then is net new for all of the other people, the same thing happens. And so you end up in this sort of catch-22 about how do we move this along, because you don't have the right mix of those types of people.
But I think that actually it's not, but you pointed to the right mix of people, right? And sometimes bringing in an organization like ours at the right time is beneficial, because we can provide a new lens, a new way to think about a process, a new what have you.
100%.
But a lot of these people sit in organizations already.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the thing, would be an interest. That's the next thing to explore, which is how do you get the right talent?
Yeah. I think every organization that we come into has team members who are pushing those boundaries, who are interested in finding new ways of doing things. I mean, we're a small company, 20-ish people. We have those people who are challenging the status quo within a company like ours, where we are built to be dynamic. Our process is to be flexible and adapt our process to our clients' processes. And we have people within our organization. And the interesting thing about these people, and I'm going to just think about one person in particular, who's a software designer, UX designer, very, very smart woman, who is also extremely quiet. And she's one of the people in our office who probes our process almost as much as anybody else. So it's not just, these people aren't necessarily overt in the way that they do it. They aren't necessarily the loudest person in the room. Sometimes they're just very thoughtful, and you kind of have to like pull that out of them a little bit to know that that's the one who's going to help me move this along. But every organization can look through their team members, and they know, okay, you're someone who's always testing new ideas within the boundaries of what we allow. You're someone who's always testing new ideas outside of the boundaries that we theoretically allow. You're very competent, and you're very competent. those types of people tend to be great at doing what we're describing because they're already interested in doing it. They're already looking for ways to advance, and they're already bought in, quote unquote, to the idea that different isn't bad.
Yeah.
And those people are supremely valuable inside of organizations of all sizes. It doesn't matter if you're 5 people or 50,000 people. Those people exist.
What you just described to me is actually a better way than how we've described it in the past of finding like the person who's the sand in the oyster, which sort of is this agitator.
Yeah.
Because we don't necessarily mean agitator, which kind of infers problem, right? Or difficult, uncomfortable. It's a person who's willing to ask the why questions or explain to me how that works. Could we consider doing it this way? Those thoughtful people who really just want to understand, gosh, they can take that really far for you internally.
Very far.
And those are good people to work. But there's another part of this when it comes to talent. And that, I think, is the responsibility of leadership within an organization to make sure that they have aligned other elements such as rewards and incentives. Right.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, you see it a lot where organizations will have an incentive program that is completely and utterly based on sales, EBITDA. Mm-hmm. And businesses cannot run without a positive, good EBITDA. But if the incentive program is solely built on that, then the entire organization's culture will be driven by growing EBITDA. So you will get an incremental growth in EBITDA every single quarter. That's what that incentive program will do. And it will deter risk-taking that might drive EBITDA down for a period of time in order to drive it up in the future. I can remember a long time ago, we were presenting to a group of, these were mostly software executives. And we were debating business models for software within an industry that historically was extremely, the manufacturing industry, so very conservative. And I used Adobe as a reference point. And I shared with the team what happened to Adobe's share price and sales numbers when they made the switch from a license model to a subscription model. And I wasn't in the room. I have no idea what happened at Adobe, but I can imagine the panic that ensued amongst many people in finance when you turn that switch and your sales drop 40%, which is, I think that was the number that happened. But they had trust in what they were doing. They had confidence in where they were going. They survived that dip, which I can't remember the year. It was 2013, 2014, something like that.
I think so.
And then the accelerated growth that occurred from that moment on is, I mean, there's books that have been written about it. It was a pretty significant shift in the way that they were delivering their software. That tells me that leadership had this type of culture already built in it, because otherwise they would have never taken this step. The company that we work with, they still don't have a new model for software. They're still operating under a relatively old model, in part because it's how they're built. Like they're just trying to stay within the process that they've got. So that notion of how leadership looks at people's ideas, the way they build incentives around them, the way that they then find those little nuggets who are going to take ideas and try to transform them, all has this stacking, multiplying effect on what happens to the company over the longer period of time. And it's almost like, we don't have a graphic, but if you were to put a graphic on this, the sandbox lives at the bottom of this triangle, and it's setting the direction. The next piece of this is the financing mechanism that allows the sandbox to then grow. The next piece is the process that then delivers good solutions, and it gets broader. And the last piece is the talented people that fill that entire funnel. Yep. And those talented people, they can make or break an organization. And I think that there's lots of reasons why companies get very scared of this. They get as I said at the beginning, like you ask 10 out of 10 CEOs of large companies, do you want to be more innovative? They will all answer yes. Always.
Yeah.
But the process is scary. It's scary to everybody. It's scary to the people who are doing it. It's scary to the people who are paying for it. It's scary to the customers. It's scary to the sales team. It's scary to the ops team. And so balancing that fear with stability of, no, we know that we can do this. We're going to test ideas. We're not going to spend money willy-nilly. We're going to go down a path. It takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of cohesiveness of strategy so that people know we're generally going over there. How we're going to get there, maybe it's a little foggy, but we're going over there. Now let's build the team and the process that allows us to get there.
Yeah. And I think when you look at some organizations that everybody believes that's an innovative company, whether they're on the Fast Company list or not.
Doesn't matter.
So
right?
if you look at a Google or you look at a 3M, and those are organizations that have put into place the 10% rule, 20% rule with their employees, which sort of sends the message to every employee that we want you to be thinking.
And it can't be the 120% rule.
No.
The 110% rule,
Well,
which is sometimes what happens, right?
Yeah,
we say, 10% of your time, 20% of your time needs to go to innovation of your own project. And really that means do your job, and then we'll take everything that you make and we'll do something fun with it. So it's got to be legitimate.
Yeah. So if we make the assumption that they are sincere in their method, I think the message that they're sending to their employees is that this is something that we value.
Yeah.
And we're going to provide the sandbox environment. We're going to provide the resources associated or needed to get that done.
And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention. So it is obviously a space that we spend the vast majority of our time in. That is where we get hired to come into organizations. And I think we would be remiss in saying companies like us are the answer, when in reality, what we are is an accelerant.
Yep.
We aren't the answer. If you've got an organization who is culturally predisposed to risk-averse behavior, companies like ours do not magically turn that around. If you have an organization that is culturally you don't have to be there yet, but you have to be leaning in to new ideas. Companies like ours then become an accelerant to take those new ideas and advance them very quickly.
Absolutely.
And we've been in that position in the same company.
Yeah.
Where one division of a company is ready to go and another part of that organization is like, whoa, what's going to happen to my bonus?
Yeah.
And so that's where leadership really has to self-assess and understand, I think we're ready for this. Now let's go get some help from people who have done this before, versus relying on us to be the team that's going to just take it and run, because it simply doesn't work unless you've got components from both working in concert.
Yeah, completely agree. So if there's a listener out there, not if there, one of these listeners.
I hope there's
a
more
few,
than two,
who is sitting there and is thinking, you know what, my organization struggles with this. We're really trying to make this change and to make this shift. Where do I start? What advice would you give them based upon your experience?
Best place to start is internally. The best place to start is to look around at the team that you have. Creativity is this funny term that we use. We get called a creative agency. There are creative finance people. There are creative ops people. There are creative marketers. There are creative sales people. There's creativity everywhere. Look across your organization. Look for two attributes: creativity and flexibility. If you find somebody who's both creative in the process and the way they think about the process you've got today, and they have a flexible mind and that they don't get totally bogged down when stuff doesn't go perfectly, that's the person you start with. Doesn't matter if they're 25 or 55. Yep. That actually has no bearing on this. They just need to have that mental model that says, they're pretty even keeled. They're not going to get too up or too down. They've got a flexibility of brain, and they apply creativity appropriately within the organization that you've got. Take that person or people or group of people and then build a small ring fence around them where they're directed to experiment toward a given goal. Not just experiment, but experiment toward a given goal and just see what happens. And if it starts to show legs, then you can put money behind that. And once you start to put money behind that, you decide, do I bring people from my internal team? Do I hire from the outside? Do I bring in consultants? And how do I give that more juice so that this can start to take off in a particular direction? To me, like all of this stuff, it starts with the right people. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that means sacrificing somebody from within the organization who's really, really good. Because if it's that important to you to find a new direction, then why wouldn't you take
the best person,
the best possible people, and put them in the role that's gonna move you to the next spot? So that's where I would start. That's where we've seen organizations start and have really, really good success.
That's fantastic. I think that's a really good place for us to wrap it up.
I agree. This was fun.
Let's do it again.
I think we should.